Alright guys, welcome back. This is going to be the third video in our March tooling series. So I just wanted to say real quick, I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy out there. This is kind of some crazy times going on. I'm not really sure. I'm not going to get too far into it or say a lot about it. There's enough online about it, and I'm sure you guys are sick of hearing about it. And so I'm not going to get off on a big conversation about it. Just know that we're doing everything that we can to stay safe and healthy. I hope you are too. We're going to continue to do what we do until somebody says otherwise, or we'll see how this thing plays out. I hope everything is pretty much over with sooner than later, and just know that our thoughts and prayers are for anybody that is I think we're all affected by this, but I mean for those that are that either have somebody that has this virus, or somebody that definitely has lost somebody because of the virus. We really send our prayers out for them, and for also anybody that's lost their job over this. I think that's kind of one of the scarier things that go along with this whole deal too, is just the fact of the economic impact of what's going on. So we want to try to keep a hopeful mindset, and when it comes to leatherwork, you always do better leatherwork when you're hopeful and positive. And so we're going to stay positive through this deal, and we're going to continue to make you videos. We're going to continue to do what we do in the shop. I've got orders to fill, and if my customers back out or need more time because of what's going on, that's absolutely fine. But I'm going to keep building because I just don't like to be behind, and if anything, I'll get kind of caught up. But so far, yeah, we live out in the country, so we're not we're not quarantined to our home, which in Texas that's not really going on as far as I know, or yet. But for those of you that are, maybe these videos will kind of help you. Be sure and check back on other videos that we have on our YouTube channel, because we have a ton, and we also have 3 or 4 of these tooling series videos. So if this is the first one you've run across, this is number 3, and so you'll want to back up and go to our YouTube channel, and actually there's a playlist for tooling series. I think I've actually named them by the month they were in or whatever, but you'll find them. But there's a tooling series. We'll do 1 to 4 videos usually, and each video we walk through every tool that we do on a pattern to get it completely tooled. And so this month we're doing this skull with an Indian headdress on. Last week was the second video, and we did all the floral tooling, got it all done. And in this video we're going to go ahead and get the texture into the feathers and the texture into the skull. Video number 4, we will do all the paint work and dye work, and so we'll finish this thing up in video number 4. We will try to get that out next week. I wanted this one to go out earlier this week, but we had a project video that was ahead of it, and so we got that done. That was the Bible cover video. You can sure find that one as well, and that's a really fun project, real easy to do. So if you haven't been doing leatherwork very long, be sure and check that one out, because that one is a great upper level craftsman or beginner craftsman project, because it's just enough to tackle to where it feels like a real project. I mean, it's something you can do something with that it's going to last forever. But it's not so difficult like a saddle that takes you, $1,000 in material and 6 or 8 weeks to build it. So, but we're going to go ahead and get started on this video. Like I said, we love y'all. We're praying for everybody that's in the world, really, I guess, as things all over the place. So we're praying that everybody stays safe and healthy, and that everybody's being kind to each other and kind of helping where you can. Don't freak out. I know a lot of people are freaking out. I didn't see too many freak out folks whenever I went grocery shopping the other day, and so we're still doing good. But I know a lot of y'all are fighting a lot of that stuff as far as grocery stores running out of stuff and all that. But everybody just have a little patience and a little grace right now, and just try to take care of yourself and your family. Be sure that you're stocked up and good and sustained. And then other than that, let's get to this video. We're going to go ahead and get started with the feathers and the skull and get some texture on this guy and see what we can do here. So the first thing that we're going to do, the first thing I'm going to do, you can do it whenever you get to this stage. All right, the first thing I'm going to do on this skull is I'm going to take my leaf liner. Now this is the same, this is a Berry King leaf liner. I've also got a craft tool that I like to use pretty good. This one is Berry King. I don't know any other, this is the nicest one I've had, like I said, but it's got pretty good little lines in it. It's just a little trapezoid shape, and it's got lines running across this way, and it's just to add texture. And so you'll use it, if you've ever used it on a leaf, you'll use it the exact same way on these feathers. Now, I said this in the early video whenever we were carving this thing or beveling this thing, but I usually, whenever I'm doing feathers, just like in a feather work pattern or something, I'll normally add a second line right here. So right here for this vein that runs down the center of the feather, I usually do a single or a double line. On these headdress feathers, I usually don't. That's just me personally. It's just there's so many feathers. They're kind of all on top of each other. So I found it's just easier for me just to do one line. You could certainly do two. It doesn't matter. Whatever you think is better. If you want to put two of them in there so that you have a raised little line that runs up there, that's fine. But I just did the one. So what we'll do is we'll take this leaf liner and we'll go ahead and start adding some texture onto the beveled line that runs down the center of these feathers. And this is just to add a little bit of depth to that vein line that runs down the middle of the feather. I don't know what that thing is called. I'm sure it has a scientific name, and with me being an animal science major, I probably should know what that term is, but I do not. So, if you know what that thing is, comment in the comments and maybe I'll see it. But I'm just going to go here. This is just to add mainly so it'll catch antique. That's all I'm really worried about, is that this thing those center lines will grab a little bit of antique. I'm not really worried because we're going to paint these. And so that's the only drawback to painting. The guy I learned to build saddles from, he used to say that if you wanted to paint something on leather, he would say that's like lace on a bowling ball. Which basically, I didn't know what the heck he was talking about for a couple of weeks there when I was working with him. Basically, it just means it's ridiculous. Like it doesn't go there. Just don't go there. That's whenever I asked him what that meant, he said, just don't go there. You don't put lace on a bowling ball. He was peculiar. But it makes sense to where, I mean, his deal was you don't put paint on leather. It's just not something you do. But this day and age, and I mean, they've been using paint on leather for years. Rocket Buster Boots has used paint on boot tops, tooled boot tops for years and years, and they do some of the best paint work I've seen. But it's fine to use it, but yeah, a lot of your purists will not like to see paint on leather. But the thing you've got to remember here, if we're going to add paint to this, is that a lot of your detail work may or may not be seen very well because you're going to be covering it with paint unless you're really thinning your paints down well. And that's something that I don't spend as much time on stuff if I'm going to be covering it up with paint. So that's why I just only do the one. Now we're going to take this tool. Now this came in a pack of tools that I got for something, birthday or Christmas or something, from my mom, but they're sculpting tools for clay sculpture. And there was a whole mess of them. It was like a little tool roll just like this, but it had a bunch of these in there and all kinds of different shapes and sizes and different points and tips on them. And they're really handy. I've used a bunch of them for modeling on leather because I've played with sculpture a little bit, and that's why she got them for me. But I don't have time to really sit and perfect a new trade like sculpture. But at the moment, so this one became a leather tool, and I just shined up the tip really, really good on a buffing wheel and got it really smooth. And you can see it's just real pointy. It almost looks like a little dental tool. Now it's sharp, but it's not cutting sharp. It's just polished sharp, okay, to a real sharp point. And all we're going to do, I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit. So if you've seen our feather tooling video, we're going to do basically the same thing on these feathers. But what I want to do is I want to follow the lines that leaf liner made, okay? So the angle that those made. They kind of point at an upward direction, but coming off the center line there. So this side needs to do the same thing. Now when I get to one of these, I just kind of come out straight. And all we're doing is lightly scratching in the lines. We're not cutting the leather, but we are scratching the leather. So just like you would with a scratch awl, if you're tracing patterns with a scratch awl, we're doing the same thing, but you're doing it really quickly and really close together to try to give the illusion that these feathers are a bunch of single strands. If you've ever played with a feather as a kid, it's really neat how it seems like it's one unit, but then as you start kind of messing with it, you notice that all it is a ton of little hairs almost that are kind of stuck together along their edge. And so, as you can see there, all we did was add those lines, and they're just scratched. They are scratched in, but they're not cut in, okay? We're going to add cut in lines, but right now we're just doing scratched lines on there. And I'm going to add just a little bit of water because we're starting to dry out just a little bit. And so we're going to do that to each feather. And I usually do these pretty quick. I don't get too particular with them. I mean, it's a feather. It's kind of like when you're doing hair, you know. There's no right or wrong way really as far as every hair in its perfect place. You just kind of throw them all in there. But you can see a little better on that one there, how we really scratched it and made those lines. And the closer together, we're just trying to add some texture, so they can be really close together. You don't want them really far apart, because like I said, we want to give the illusion that it is, you know, a million little hairs and not one solid piece of feather, you know. And I've seen a lot of feathers tooled, and a lot of guys don't do this step here because it takes too much time. When we did our feather saddle, I think there was almost 200 feathers on that saddle. And I spent a lot of time doing this. And so, yeah, it is kind of nerve-wracking if you've got a lot of them to do. And so, but I just think the time sacrifice is well worth it for the end result, because when we add the decorative cuts to this, it really brings those feathers to life. And then when we go to paint this and then antique it, it'll give them even more lifelike appearance, and they look really, really good. And so I highly recommend, if you're going to tool feathers, you need to texture them. If you don't, they won't really look like you're going to want them to look. And I missed one line here. And remember, and like I've said in other videos, if you see a piece that you forgot to bevel or background or whatever, go ahead and pick it up while you're sitting there, because you will not remember where it was by the time you get back to it. And it seems like this will take forever, but it really doesn't. It goes pretty quick. But there's no pear shading on feathers. I'm sure you could. I haven't played with the pear shader much on feathers. But I guess you could, to just add a little bit of tone to them. But for me, the way I do my feathers, it's texturing first, you know, just beveling and texturing, and then we'll decorative cut them. I don't do any kind of pear shading or anything. I missed another one. Now, if you don't have one of these little modeling tools, you can certainly make one very easily with like an old awl blade or something that's kind of worn down, or if you got to, you know, take a nail and stick it in a little wooden handle or something and sharpen it up on a grinder. Just something to make that really sharp point. I have used also, if you have a Peter Main's modeling tool, which these things are well worth their money to get, and we'll use this when we do this skull here in a minute. But he's got a pointy end and then a spoon on the other side. And this side works well for this too. It just doesn't scratch it as much as I want it to, and so I don't use it for that if I don't have to. If I can't find this tool, and I have lost it a few times in the shop, but if I can't find it, I will use this. So that's fine too, any kind of modeling tool. But I find that the sharper the point, like I said, not to where it cuts the leather, but just to where it kind of scratches the leather, the better it works when you go to antique. It'll pick up more antique because you're actually kind of scribing that leather and creating some texture in the grain for the antique to settle in. And so that's just my little tip there. Alright, so you can see those feathers, they have, all the ones on the top, they have some pretty good texture there. So we're not done with them. We'll kind of keep going down here and get these. I want to thank y'all for all the kind words too on this video. Seems like this little pattern's been pretty popular. I don't know if it's more popular than the other tooling series that we've done, but it seems like a lot of folks really wanted to learn how to tool these skulls. I'm assuming it's the skulls because I've been doing feathers online for a while. Or there's a few videos on our YouTube channel about that, so I'm assuming it's the skull. But it seems like y'all really like the tooling series, and I enjoy doing them. They're an easier video for me to make, and honestly, it's kind of fun because I can just do what I do every day and film it. And there's not a lot of editing. You just have to stretch it out over 3 or 4 videos, or else that one video will be 3 or 4 hours long. And I'm not Joe Rogan, so I don't think y'all want to hear me ramble for 3 or 4 hours. Heck, some of y'all don't want to hear me ramble for 10 minutes if you read some of the YouTube comments. But that's not my problem. Okay, so now they're all these feathers are textured. We've added a little bit of texture, but we're not done. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our swivel knife. Now you want to be sure that your swivel knife is sharp and stropped, just like anything else. Because what we're going to do is it kind of takes a feel when you first start doing it. So you've got to just take your time, and it's going to feel kind of awkward right at first. So what we're going to do is we're going to start on the outside. So we're going to start like right here, and then we're going to carve and let your knife kind of follow the lines that you carved in there, but also let it try to kind of come out. You see how it's pushing that piece right there just a little bit outward? See that? You want to try to let that, but then kind of come in at a little bit of an arc. What that's going to do is it's going to pick up this little piece. You see how loose that is? That's kind of what we want, because if you look at a real feather, you know, that they can separate real easy like that. And so what I meant by it, sometimes you got to be a little careful when it takes a little bit of a feel, is because sometimes you'll come in here and then it'll just slide all the way and you'll cut a piece off like that. But if it's still attached, just leave it, because it'll actually give a cool look to that. You want to try not to do that very much, just because you'll get little loose pieces of leather sticking up out of there. But every once in a while, it's really a cool little effect. And then when I get to these, I just kind of do 2 of them close together. And that way, you've got where it looks like there's a bunch of little ones kind of separating. Because, you know, the base of a feather will kind of separate a little bit more than it does out towards the tip of the feather. And so I'll only usually do 1 or 2 here at the tip part, and then when I get to these smaller pieces, I'll do at least a couple. But you can use your scratch lines that we just made as kind of your guide on how your swivel knife blade should follow. And you don't want to go all the way to your center vein. You're just going just right there, right off the edge, and it almost becomes like a flicking with your swivel knife. You're not really doing long flowing carve lines. You're just kind of flicking the blade through the edge of the feather. And I've seen people do these before too, from our other videos. Be sure you're getting the point of your blade off of the feather. So whatever feather you're carving, you want to start right there at the edge where you beveled. And that way you actually create a separation in the edge there. And you can do them a little randomly, you know, have one right out here and then one in there and then here, do two of them. Maintain the abstraction a little bit, you know. There's a painter that I follow that always says that when he's painting, you know, maintain the abstraction. When you're doing any kind of artwork, especially hair or feathers or freckles or, you know, whatever it might be within your art, if it's naturally abstract and naturally random looking, try to maintain some of that when you're in your tooling too, or you're painting or drawing or whatever you're doing. We do a lot of Cactus, and Cactus has a lot of abstraction, a lot of randomness in the placement of the thorns. And so you don't want to do them in a pattern. You know, you don't want to do them every so many inches or whatever apart. You want to do them very randomly, or else it won't look very natural. So same thing with these feathers. Don't do them all the same. You know, kind of do some with more, some with less, different placements. You see right there how that one, when I cut it, that tip of it kind of almost comes back over the top of the feather. See how loose that is? That's actually pretty cool. Like it ends up looking good. It's a little trick to paint, but we'll get to that when we paint this thing. But you don't want all of them doing that, but a few of them here and there that really add some realism to what you're creating. So you can see how much those little cuts added realism to these feathers. And so they really, now they're starting to look like actual feathers. So now what I'll do is I like to add just some decorative cuts here. 2, 3, whatever. Don't get too crazy with these. I just like to add some coming off of that center vine, just because they'll catch antique. Again, it'll draw the eye to that center and kind of separate each feather, because each one will have more of a center line in there. And so I just kind of add a few here and there. And like I said, even these are just little flicks. They're not drawn out, real elaborate decorative cuts. For me, when it comes to decorative cutting, less is more most of the time. You can get a little too overzealous there with your decorative cuts and really cause a lot of erratic activity in your pattern that kind of isn't as palatable for the eye if you'd have done less of it. So that's our feathers. Now the feathers, I'm going to call those done. And so even natural, they look really neat. They're not, you know, really, they don't really jump out. They go really good with floral. So if you're wanting to add something other than flowers and leaves to your vine work, that's what makes feathers a really good option. Just because even as a natural piece without any kind of paint or dye, they look really, really cool. And so now we'll work on our skull.
All right, now with the skull, we're going to use this Petermain modeling tool. You can also use any other modeling tool, any one that you have. Modeling spoons, you may have a whole set of them from Craft Tool. Those are great. The only thing I would say is be sure to buff them off on a cloth buffing wheel to a high mirrored finish. Really, really smooth. You don't want to be scratching when you're doing stuff like that. Like I said, when we're doing the feather stuff, we want that to scratch some. We don't want it to cut or really, really rough it up, but we do want to scratch it in nicely. And so now what we'll do is we're going to take some pear shaders. Now this is an old Macmillan more than likely. It doesn't have a mark on it, but that's probably what it is. And it's a very old pear shader. You'll have to find one that's similar from Craft Tool or something like this one. This is a Craft Tool P206. And it's just it's the closest thing I've got to that one. So a P206 would work. I've got another one here that I've kind of filed down along the edge some to make it a little bit narrower. And this one is a P203, no, P703. Yeah, this one's a P703. And just any set of smooth pear shaders. I prefer smooth on when I'm doing the skulls. But what I'm going to do first, I'm going to start right here. We just want to start adding a little bit of bone texture. And so I'm just going to kind of shape just a little bit right there in the brow. And you don't want your leather too wet when you're doing this. If your leather's too wet, you won't get a good burnish. So if you see there how dark that brow has gotten where I hit it with that pear shader, that's the burnish that everybody's talking about. That's what you're kind of looking for, is whenever you hit with that tool, it gets some color. Now, if you aren't getting the color that you like, or as much as we're getting here, if you're not getting, you know, a good amount of burnish, this is Herman Oak leather. So Herman Oak burnishes really well. Wicket and Craig burnishes even better from a dark standpoint. If you want a really dark burnish and good contrast, Wicket and Craig russet leather burnishes really well. I find sometimes it's a little much, but it makes for a really nice piece when you're tooling. But if you're tooling on an import leather or a tandy type lower grade leather, you probably are not going to get the color that you want in your pear shaders. So don't think that you're doing something wrong. It's probably the material. Just some of those import leathers or some of Tandy's cheaper leather, sometimes they just don't get the burnishing quality. If you ever look at the card, the sales card or the sale advertisements in the catalog for different leathers, they'll usually always mention their dyeing, their stamping, dyeing, and burnishing qualities. And those are the main three qualities when it comes to veg tan that they're looking for. And so if you're not seeing that, then that leather would have a poor burnishing quality. You know, it may dye well, it may shape well, or, you know, mold really good or stamp, you know, decent, but it may not burnish really well. So that's just one of the indicators. That's one of the things that you're looking for when you're buying leather. And that's why everybody's got, you know, the leather that they like to use is one of those qualities. They're looking for one of those. And so now we'll get our smaller pear shader. We want to just make sure your pear shader fits in the area you're trying to kind of texture. And all I'm doing is just trying to get a little bit of texture right there at the point where these little scallop pieces are around the skull right here. I'm just adding a little bit of texture in there. And I try to really float them out and lightly tap so that I don't leave a tool mark. So you wouldn't want to come in there and just do that, because that looks like a stamp. And so what I like to do is, you know, kind of come out of it a little bit and just smooth my tracks, so to speak, so that you don't see that. Now I'm going to come here and use the tail end of this, so the heel of it, and I just want to add just a little bit around the teeth to where we create almost like little indentions in the front of the skull there, where the teeth would tie into the upper jaw. And then here we'll just real lightly kind of tap over to smooth some of that. We'll do some more with the modeling spoon as well. And so there you can kind of see already we're starting to get a little bit of shape and texture there. And so now we'll go ahead. That's probably all I'm going to get with those for right now. We'll just start playing with it and see what we can get. Now I'm going to take the spoon end of my modeling tool and just start burnishing and drawing that out just a little bit. Don't get too close to the nose. I kind of got a little close right there. So I'm pressing with pretty good force there and then just backing off as we draw out. We're just trying to kind of mold that leather almost. Just like we did if you've watched the horse head tooling one. We're just trying to add a little bit of color through the burnish, and that way it's got some shape to it and it's not just, you know, a smooth skull. It needs to have some shape. So the same thing, I'm going to kind of go around this nose just a little bit. Now there's a lot of toolers, especially in Japan. There's a couple I follow that do some really neat skulls, and I mean their skulls got an amazing amount of texture to them. They do just a wonderful job. And here I just want to kind of draw this out this way. And if your leather is at just the right water level, I mean this thing, we've only wet it that one time, and so it's starting to dry out, but that's, you want it a little bit drier when you're using your modeling tools because you'll get a little bit more burnish. But you've got to be careful because if it gets too dry, you just start scratching the leather and kind of almost burning it. So you've got to kind of keep an eye on that. You don't have to work super swiftly, but you need to be on the move so that you don't lose your case before you're done. Then I like to get underneath this brow and really kind of add a socket, so to speak, here on this eye, to where it's almost got not a hard line, but it's got like a little rim around it. Now I'll just kind of lightly kind of blend all this stuff together. So like when I'm doing the eye sockets here, I will start out with a pretty distinctive line around there. So you've got a pretty hard line right there, just to get my parameters, kind of how far out and how dark, where I want that. And then you can go back and just kind of lightly blend that together to where you lose the harshness of the line there. You want to take your spoon and just kind of smooth out any abrupt little tool marks that you may have left. And just take your time, just like on the horse. Like, just keep fiddling with it and keep working on it. You'll begin to start getting the shading that you want, and you'll give the shape and tone of the skull or whatever you're modeling. You'll get it kind of where you want it. Now we'll come back up here where we did the pear shader, and I'm going to come straight out of that pear shader and accentuate this brow that makes somewhat of a eyebrow here. So now you can see how that skull's got quite a bit more texture. It's got a lot more shape. It just looks a lot more 3D than it did before we did that. And so this is a technique that can really help if you're doing a lot of figures, is to learn to use your modeling spoons, your modeling tools, to really add some good texture and stuff to your work, because simply beveling and pear shading and stuff usually has its limits. And so this is a good way to kind of add a little bit more life and a little bit more realism to it. Alright, now this little deal, I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit of something to that too, just to break it up a little bit. And here I am going to leave a little distinctive line right there. Then we'll come here on the opposite side and do do one running the other way, but not all the way. Just so it has a little fabric look to it. And this is kind of one of those projects too, where, you know, my theory is it's kind of like the old dodgeball movie with Ben Stiller, you know, where the old man throws the wrench and says, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. Kind of a little play here as far as if you can draw on paper, you're at a much better advantage when you draw on leather. And so a lot of the techniques, the media and the, you know, the material that you're working on and the tools that you're using are different than when you draw on paper, but the theory is still there. The same thing when you paint, same thing when you know, do digital artworks or anything like that. You know, the theory's still there. And so you just have to learn the material or the media that you're working in and the tools that you use in that. And so all we're doing here is adding contrast, shading, playing with light. That's what we're doing. All right. So that's all the texture that I'm going to add to the skull. You could certainly sit here and keep on going to get it just how you wanted it. And you could play with this for a couple hours, you know, add some more water, keep fiddling with it, keep, you know, adding texture and stuff. But I'm going to stop right there for the sake of the video length and just kind of show you how I do my decorative cuts. Now, skulls have cracks, and you can certainly pull up an anatomy photograph of an actual skull and, you know, look at where those cracks are and all that stuff. I usually just try to do them kind of random, and so like we'll come in here, we'll add one here, and then maybe one coming off here. They're kind of almost like lightning. And so what we'll do is just real lightly, and you want to keep wiggling your swivel knife, and remember, try to maintain the abstraction. So if you're going to put them in there, just do them kind of, you know, balanced, but kind of randomly, you know, because a skull has suture joints in it, which are what these would be. And so that's making the cracks that you see in any kind of skull. And that's where the bones, they're actually little joints, and that's where the bone fragments connect to each other. And so, you know, there are specific places where these are, but I usually, you know, for art, I just kind of put them where I think they'd look cool. Because these cracks, even through the paint, they're going to catch antique. So they're going to show up very nicely when we go to paint this. And so you can add as many or as few as you want to. I find less is more. I'm trying to get too crazy with it. And so the last thing that we're going to do to this skull is I'm going to take our small undercut that we used way back when, and right here in the teeth and in these scallops, we're going to really lift that up so that it's got a lot of depth to it, so it looks like it's way in there. We want to really make it look like there's a tooth missing here. So we're going to get in there and really go deep with this tool so that you can get a nice rise in that skull. You can see how deep I went with those. We wanted to make it look like there's something missing there. There should have been teeth there. That'll really draw the viewer's eye there really nicely. And then here I like to go pretty well too. And we'll use couple different undercuts there. Now we'll step up to our next biggest one. And here in the corner of the nose. And then I'll even come in here to the eyes. Go ahead and get those a little deeper. Now, if you're tooling this on 5-6 ounce leather, you might not need to hit it as hard as I was hitting it right there, because you will go through. So that's where these mats here come real handy on thinner leather, just so at least you're not going through your material and down onto your slab. But you want to get as deep as you can in there, and that way you've got a lot of depth in the tooling, so that it looks, you know, almost real, sitting on top. We almost want this thing to look like it's sitting on top of all this tooling instead of, you know, down inside it. And now, since we're here, we can go ahead and do the tips of our feathers as well if you want, and that'll just add a little bit more lift to those. Alright, so you can see how much better, just doing that right there in those curves and the tip of the feathers, how much more depth that gives it. That really makes it look a lot better. Now you can see how high that skull actually looks like it's coming out of the leather there. That's what the undercuts are good for, and that's done all at the end. Once you've got all your other stuff done, you can go back through and lift it. Now you can look how far the eyes look sunken into the skull there. And so that's our skull there. Now I will add here, I forgot about this part, I usually kind of try to texture these teeth just a little bit, as far as with the other end of your modeling spoon or a smaller spoon, and just try to add just a little bit of color as far as just burnishing. We're going to paint them anyway, but I just want to kind of give them a little bit of texture so they don't look just smooth. So that's our skull. Okay, so we did the feathers. We used some pear shaders on the skull, just any pear shaders that you want to use. We used our modeling tool for the skull, the water spoon part, to get this shading in there. We used our dental tool or sculptor's tool here with a nice sharp point to do the scratching in the feathers, and then our swivel knife to add the cuts into the feathers in order to make them look like real feathers, where they have, you know, a lot of little wispies in there and stuff. And then we went back through and undercut the whole thing again, just the skull and the feathers. So now that's everything as far as the tooling goes. This is done. You could take this now, and I would call it finished. You could oil it, put a nice little coat of olive oil on there, or neatsfoot oil, or whatever you wanted to use. Give it a little color, and then antique it or not antique it, either way, and you could call it finished. In the next video, we are going to paint this. I'm going to paint the skull. I'm going to paint the feathers. We'll do something cool with those. We'll paint this part here of the headband and the little beads and stuff off the side. And we'll probably do a two-tone brown on the rest of the piece, just so that that skull really, really stands out. This will be a really interesting video. I appreciate y'all watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot from it. Like I said, as far as a modeling tool, you can use anything. I mean, anything that, like I said, those dental tools, are some in there that I shined up just for doing stuff with, like I do with this one. This one from Peter Main, it's really neat. You'd have to contact him on Facebook and see. I know he makes them, so sometimes he's got some, sometimes he's got to make them. But if you just message him on Facebook, he can certainly put you down for an order, and next time he makes some, send you one out. I don't remember what I paid for them. I think they're around $50 or something, but they're really worth it. They're really handy. They've got a good feel to them, and plus Peter Main made it, so I just wanted one to have in my collection of something that he made. But yeah, you can use craft tool, modeling spoons, anything that's just smooth that you can do the shading with. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got a lot from it. Tooling skulls, there's a ton of different ways to do it, a ton of different ways to draw them. You can, they're just really fun to tool, and it's something different to put in with floral. The feathers go well with that also. But the skull is just kind of a striking image when you see it in leather. It just kind of stands out. Some people hate them. Some people love them. Yeah, I get kind of a 50-50 response to skulls. But one thing is, everybody notices them. So if you put them on something, they're kind of interesting. Have fun with this. If this is your first time watching one of these tooling series, there is 2 videos before this one here that shows you how we got to where we were when we started, and there'll be one more after it for this pattern. There is a free pattern. There's a link down in the description. You can click on that link, pop your email address in there, and you get access to that pattern. You just print it out and then transfer it to a piece of leather and tool along with us. You can go back to the first video and follow along and then go with us. There's also 2 or 3 other little tooling series on our channel, and you can follow those and try those patterns out as well. So that's all we got for you in this video. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody's doing okay out there. Keep a positive mindset and just try to keep yourself busy, work on some things. If you're stuck at home and not being able to go to work, right now is a great time to just try to work on some things that you haven't had time to work on before. And one of those may be leather work. And if you're wanting to get better at your tooling, this is a perfect time to do that. You can work on that as long as you've got the space in your schedule. If you got kids at home, you might have to work in between nap times or something like that. But it's a great time to work on that. Stay safe, stay positive. We appreciate y'all, and we'll see y'all in the next video. Thank y'all very much.